Welcome to the Atlantic Current. I'm Vince Martin here with Tull McAdoo from the Irish Politics newsletter. This is the second part of our two-part premiere. We are talking today about the election of Ireland's 10th president, Catherine Connolly. And Tull, I said in our first episode that I thought it was a fascinating campaign in terms of the politics. Maybe you could even say the sport of it. Let's start there. Do you think that's fair? As an astute observer of Irish politics, did you enjoy it?
Hello, Vince. The long and short of it is no, I don't like Irish presidential elections. I hate them, in fact. In fact, of all the elections in Ireland, this is the most insignificant of all our Irish elections, because Irish presidential elections tend to cause a hell of a lot of collateral damage to other politicians. The leaders of the two main parties in government have been incredibly damaged by this election. For a job with no power, it's a 99% ceremonial job, but the President of Ireland doesn't have the power to change a light bulb in the presidential mansion or a salutron. If President Connolly wants a said light bulb change, he has to contact the civil servant first. And, you know, we had President Zelensky over on a state visit from Ukraine yesterday. Since the war in Ukraine began, she's been quite critical of Ukraine, and she said she's, uttered a lot of pro-Russian thoughts in her national parliament. And yesterday she was so powerless, constitutionally powerless. She was like, she's like a church mouse. There wasn't a squeak out of her.
Well, that's an interesting place to start, particularly because it does seem like the election is a switch against Europe's broader move right. You said in our first episode she's very left-wing. You mentioned kind of Cuba, Venezuela left-wing. Is that where Ireland's political trajectory is going?
The short answer is no. It's not a mad swing to the left. It's more of a drift, maybe. I mean, straight away, okay, in case anybody says we're trying to delegitimize Catherine Connolly's election, she was absolutely democratically and legitimately elected as Ireland's 10th president. However, it comes with a caveat for those in Ireland saying that there is a left-wing surge, and a lot of people are saying, there's going to be unity left and all this kind of crack, but there's not. I'll provide some context. I think the lowest ever turnout for a US presidential election was 49%. And that was for Bill Clinton in 1996. It was the lowest turnout for an American presidential election. That was 49%. And, Clinton was up to his ears and all kind of murky stuff, and he still got re-elected. Now, in the Irish presidential election this time out, only 45% of the eligible Irish electorate bothered to show up. Okay. Of that 45% who did show up, which is under 1.5 million people, which is not a whole lot by United States standards, almost 1 million people voted for Catherine Connolly out of that 1.5 million, okay? And just under 500,000 voted for the other two candidates, one of which had pulled out, which we'll come to. So all in all, 2/3 of the eligible voters did not vote for Catherine Connolly, okay? So I don't think it's the big win some of the left here in Ireland are claiming to be, I mean, if 2/3 of the eligible voters did not show up to vote for you, then, I'm not seeing any mad left-wing rush here.
Yeah, you can see a little bit of that in American politics. We had off-year elections last month, and that there's a kind of a similar idea that the left had a big win because they won governorships in New Jersey and Virginia. But to your point about turnout, these are weird elections with kind of relatively small turnouts. It's dangerous, I think, to draw a broader conclusion. And in this case, as you alluded to, the dynamics of the campaign itself were unusual. So does that also drives a little bit of skepticism toward the idea that the win is a big change in the way the electorate behaves, the electorate feels?
I think people are probably reading too much into it. Unless Connolly herself decides to be a hugely controversial president, but I'm thinking at the moment she won't be.
She's boxed in a little bit, huh?
I think she might be a little bit, yeah. She could be she could flirt with, around the edges of the Constitution and stuff like that, but I don't think she can do a whole lot. I don't think she will, which is my initial thoughts at the moment. She's been very quiet. She's playing by all the rules at the moment. So, I mean, look, she had a huge amount of backing behind her. I mean, do you know how many registered political parties there are in Ireland to register to contest elections?
I could name probably 5 and properly pronounce 2, 3. So I'll make a guess 7.
And I'm sure some historian or political scientist is going to get ratio on me when this goes out. But I think there's 30 political parties in Ireland eligible to run candidates, of which 25 are left wing of some hue.
Wow.
So President Connolly, she had 25 out of 30 eligible political parties backing her, essentially. Now, it's unlikely that the grand coalition of the left will hold. There's just too many left-wing opinions involved for it to be cohesive in any way. And already it's beginning to fracture because of immigration. In the history of Ireland's over 100 years old now. And in those 100 years, we've had 80 political parties formed on the Isle of Ireland since the foundation of the state. So, and everything's fragmenting so much politically at the moment. I suspect we're going to have another 80 political parties formed, by the wayside in the next 100 years also. Things are so fragmented at the moment. I don't see how a unity left or the left wing being anyway united will hold out for much longer.
Yeah, as an American, 30 seems like an insane number given that we have like two. I was going to say 2.5, but we have kind of more like 2 and 3 100s. You have coalition governments in Europe. We put our coalitions within the two major parties. So in the Republicans, you have Christian nationalists and atheist libertarians, and on the left in the Democratic Party, you've got these huge labor unions and then anti-corporate environmentalists. We could probably get to 30 if we really tried, as he said, given how fragmented everything is in both our countries at the moment. So let's move on kind of to the practical effect of the win. I mean, as you said, and for our American listeners, the Irish president is not the American president. The Irish president is the head of state, not the head of government. Is that a kind of a good shorthand way to put it?
You're 100% correct. I mean, her speeches about peace, justice, and the suffering of distant peoples play very well in a country like Ireland. We practically invented sympathy for the underdog, but the Irish government runs foreign policy, not the president. If the president of Ireland wants to leave the country, she has to get the permission of the government of the day to leave the country. Even if she wants to do a bit of shopping in Paris or New York or whatever, she's a ceremonial head of state. She's allowed to refer bills to the Supreme Court, and that's about her. That's her only ace in her back pocket. But as I always say to people, the government will just rewrite the bill to suit the law, to suit the Constitution. So she's powerless.
Right. We'll come to some of the twists in that campaign, but I kind of want to start at something that happened at the beginning, even though I know I'm probably going to hear the groans over here from across the Atlantic. But I did want to ask about someone who said that he wanted to run for president, but could not, and that is former Ultimate Fighting champion Conor McGregor. Why was he not allowed to run? Should he have been allowed to run? And do you think that he had any real chance of winning?
First out the door, he didn't have any chance of winning.
Okay.
Right.
That'll be news to a lot of Americans on Twitter, including Elon Musk. What was his tweet? Conor McGregor to save Ireland. I think it was. Yeah. Thanks, Elon.
There's lots of reasons why Conor McGregor shouldn't be president, but there was only one reason he couldn't be president, and that's because he's not very good at politics.
No problem.
For most candidates, if you want to be president of Ireland, you're going to have to build alliances like Catherine Connolly did. If you're not already embedded in the political system, you need to convince those who are to take a chance. And it's a test of your networking skills and your ability to inspire confidence in your vision. You need to charm politicians. You need to sweet talk power brokers into backing you. McGregor doesn't have that political ability. The Irish presidency is a ceremonial role, as we said 2, 3, 4 times now already, steeped in dignity and decorum. And the electorate tends to favour candidates who embody those qualities, or at least don't actively repel them anyway, at least.
Are you really telling me that Conor McGregor is not dignified? You're going to go out on that limb on our second episode?
Well, I mean, there's a certain element of him being a bit of a parvenu, isn't there? He's a nouveau riche, and he's been... He's
got all that proper 12 money now, like we talked about in our other episode.
Yeah, there's an element of him being a parvenu and polite society turning their noses up on him.
Gotcha. And there's also the fact he said he needs to build alliances in Ireland. That's not just a matter of building alliances to capture voters. That's a matter of building alliances to actually get onto the ballot, right? You guys have a system for the presidency.
Yeah, it's not very convoluted, actually. People think it's very complicated. It's not really, but you need 20 members of your Oireachtas, okay? That's known as the Dáil and the Seanad. That's the same as your Houses of Congress and your Senate,
Right.
your joint chambers, okay? So you need 20 nominations from those people, okay, at the very top of elected representative politics. And the other route is, if you get those 20 members, you're fine, you're on the ticket, away you go. The Republic of Ireland is made up of 26 counties.
Right.
And if you can get the backing of 4 of those local authorities, which includes some city authorities, which would be equivalent of 4 of your states.
Okay.
Okay, so on a much smaller level, obviously. So if you would get the backing of 4 states, state legislatures in America, okay, that's the equivalent of it. And you can obviously, if you're a sitting president, you can nominate yourself also. That's the long and short of Irish, how you get on an Irish election ballot. Political scientists will draw up, multitudes of other, how you get on the ballots and stuff like that. But that's them. That's the Constitution.
That's the core path. Gotcha. So just to kind of wrap a bow on it, so is there any scenario in which McGregor could have won or even factored into the race?
No is the short answer. I think does he have 18 or 19 previous convictions for traffic? I think it's for traffic going back to 2009, but more recently and more pertinently, a woman who accused Conor McGregor of raping her won her claim against him for damages in a civil case. A jury found McGregor assaulting Nikita Hand in a Dublin hotel in December 2018, which I think he appealed and then lost. So unlike in the US, where certain candidates with, shall we say, complicated pasts can still rally votes, Ireland's presidential elections don't offer much room for rapists to gain traction.
So we'll save that one for the next episode, I think. What angle do you think he was playing?
He was doing what Conor McGregor does best, and that's self-promotion, isn't it? He does it quite well. Does it quite well. Whether you like him or loathe him, he's very good at the self-promotion.
That's probably true. Okay. So McGregor makes a lot of noise, particularly on social media, but he isn't a real factor. We wind up instead with 3 real candidates: Connolly, Heather Humphreys, and Jim Gavin. Heather Humphreys is the nice and boring Fine Gael candidate, but as you've put it in the Irish Politics newsletter, the real story is Jim Gavin blowing up all over Fianna Fáil.
Yeah, Heather was actually Fine Gael's second candidate because Maureen McGuinness had pulled out. The front runner had actually pulled out due to health reasons, and Heather was the backup candidate, and she stepped up, didn't do much, didn't inspire. That's best forgotten about by everybody in Fine Gael. The real story, though, was Jim Gavin blowing up over Fianna Fáil. That's the real kind of, oh my God, that just kind of happened in Irish politics moment,
Because he withdraws from the race at a point where you're really not supposed to withdraw. I mean, this is just weeks, a few weeks before the actual election was held.
Yeah, he was nominated. His papers were handed in.
He withdraws at a point where there's no going back. There's no replacing him.
No, there's no replacing him. You couldn't replace him constitutionally. If they wanted, they just couldn't replace him. So.
And why does he wind up withdrawing?
He withdrew from the presidential election due to not being prepared to handle the intense scrutiny and the main controversy surrounding his treating of a former tenant of his very poorly by not paying him back money that was owed. But there were other campaign issues. It was pretty obvious early on that Jim Gavin was completely out of his depth. And the long and short of his, Fianna Fáil, who nominated Jim Gavin for the presidency, didn't vet him properly and stress test him for media appearances.
I'll be honest, the story about the tenant, it does seem odd from the outside that the story becomes so significant. The payment he supposedly owed his tenant was relatively small, correct? I mean, it's a couple €1,000.
It was more like, I think, 3,300 euros, but that's about nearly 4,000 of your Yankee dollars. But apart from all that, Jim Gavin's financial woes from the 2008 crash were well known in media and political circles for a long time. Even before he was the Fianna Fáil candidate, people knew that Jim Gavin had financial issues going back to 2008. Journalists knew, the media knew, it was an open secret. Politicians knew. It was a very open secret. I suppose it came down to Fianna Fáil not vetting their man properly. But you don't care about vetting your candidates anymore in U.S. elections, do you, Vince? And certainly not when and certainly not when it comes to minuscule amount of $3,800.
Yeah, I suppose that's a fair point. $4,000 is not moving any elections in the United States anymore. I mean, I would point out in October, our twice elected president pardoned a man named Changpeng Zhao. He's a founder of a cryptocurrency exchange called Binance. He'd been convicted of violating laws around money laundering. And not coincidentally, Binance built the code for the Trump family stablecoin, which is a type of cryptocurrency we don't need to really get into. So Trump goes, well, I don't even know who Zhao is. And, he made a ripple. No one cares. Has his own meme coin. And if you invest the most amount of money and buy most of his meme coin, you get a private dinner with him. One of the people who did that is another crypto executive who's under investigation by the federal government for years. So, we're not doing a great job vetting our candidates, and it does go far beyond Trump. So from here, as an outsider, this being a scandal is almost unthinkable. Is there a broader cultural relevance to the revelation, the idea of it being landlord-tenant, maybe touching a nerve given Ireland's history, or is there something more current to it?
Well, I think it's very current and it's very relevant. We're in the midst of a housing crisis in Ireland. Rents are higher than they've ever been, and greedy landlords are in the firing line. So Gavin fitted that stereotype, I suppose. But the reality was he was just as broke as the rest of the country in 2008. But it was still very poor. It was still very poor behaviour from him. And he didn't pay his tenant back. And there's no excusing that. There's no getting away with that. And I remember thinking when the revelation came out, I thought that was the one I was going to do him in.
Really?
I thought he was done there. And look, what's even worse from Fianna Fáil is that it's caused a massive headache for our current Taoiseach, Micheál Martin. He's been in charge of his party now for 14 years, and people, I suppose, are just tired of him. No one lasts that long as a political leader in Irish politics anymore. And it's a matter of when rather than if he goes, I think. But in saying that, the current Fianna Fáil parliamentary is not top heavy with battle-hardened politicians. There's a lot of lightweights there. So Micheál might survive by virtue of there's nobody willing to take him out properly.
There's a very similar sense to that in America right now, particularly on the Democratic side. They've had leaders, guys like Schumer in the Senate, who have been in for so long that everyone's sick of them. But the very fact that they've been in so long also means that no one's had the experience or the grooming to really take them on in the kind of knife fight you need to take on somebody who's been in power that long, right? But this is now a story that has some political heft, even if the office of the presidency is somewhat limited, because, as you say, it reflects pretty poorly on Martin. Do you really think it's enough that his leadership is imperiled?
Yes, I think it is. And I think it is for a couple of reasons. I think that there's a movement against him, and it's a very public movement. Has been, people speaking, his backbench TDs, his backbench politicians are actually, they're quite open in the media about how they want rid of him so publicly, When your enemies are out for you in public like that in Irish politics, it means that they have the backing of a lot more people in private, and they're willing to be a little bit bravado about and stuff like that. But look, Micheál Martin is going to have to be dragged kicking and screaming from office. So the long and short of it, how this works for you American people or listeners, for a motion of no confidence in Micheál Martin's leadership, I think 12 TDs will need to come forward and kind of ask him to go quietly. And that's the sign that a motion of no confidence in him. You need 12 TDs. And for it to succeed, a majority would then need to vote against Micheál Martin. One man, one vote. And after that, if there's a leadership contest, if Micheál Martin is out of office and he's kicked out, there's a motion of no confidence in him. And if that's carried, if you're a member of the Fianna Fáil party, you're able to vote for who you want in the leadership contest. It's quite simple.
I see. So how long do you think he lasts?
I would say once his leadership of the EU presidency is up, which is next year, for 6 months. Each country gets a 6 months on a rotating basis, and it's Ireland's turn next year. And I think they might wait for him after that. And as soon as he steps down, the knives will be out for him.
So Gavin's withdrawal has another effect. We alluded to this in the first episode. It led to the end of probably the most successful partnership in Irish podcasting until now, which was between Ivan Yates and Matt Cooper, right?
Yeah, we're these are our first 2 episodes. We're finding our feet. We're a bit like Bambi. We will get there. We will stand up and walk. Yeah, look, Matt and Ivan is in podcasting terms is a better love story than the Titanic movie, but and like the movie, it ended in disaster though. I suppose Ivan was hoisted on his own petard while simultaneously crashing into a Jim Gavin shaped iceberg. You see, Ivan was a very naughty boy and did disclose to his podcasting partner before he had been giving Jim Gavin, a Fianna Fáil presidential candidate, media training. Now, if I'd given Jim Gavin media training and Gavin performed like he did, quite frankly, I'd pack in the old media training because that was absolutely brutal stuff from Jim Gavin. I mean, I wouldn't even admit to it. I'd be like St. Peter denying Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. I haven't a clue who this Jim fella is. Don't know him. Didn't train him. And you'd cross the road to avoid him, if you saw him on the street. The weird thing about this is like Ireland's a very small country. Your business secrets are not kept for long. Your business, your contacts, who you're hanging around with, who you're having a pint in the local pub with. It was going to get out. It was going to leak. And it turned out afterwards that, Ivan had been training a load of politicians and neglected to tell anyone that there might be a hint of a conflict of interest. It led to the breakup of an incredibly popular podcast and the first Path to Power to change its format. But I wonder how long it will survive without Ivan, even though the guests he has replaced with Ivan are very good. But Ivan's Ivan. He's box office, he's a gossip, he's terribly indiscreet, and he's entertaining. And that's what people like. People love a good gossip in Ireland, and Ivan had that down to a T. Now, Irish politicians were holding committee hearings. You have them in America, don't you? Where you have your arms committees and health committees, and what's the famous, powerful one, the finance committee?
Yeah, finance, ways and means. Yeah, they're all much more often theatrical than practical. Yep.
Yeah, well, that's the right. So we have the exact same issue here. It's all for theatre. It's all political theatre. There's nothing practical comes of it. But our media committee here are talking about regulations for podcasts and, standards and stuff like that. My standards are quite low, so I know how that's going to work. But how would they, you're thinking yourself, how would they go enforce the likes of this podcast, which is hosted in the land of free speech in the USA?
Well, we'll see. We cross the wrong line the wrong day, even in America, we may see some consequences. But for now, I guess we're safe. This scandal, too, like the Gavin scandal, is tough to understand as an American. And I know it almost sounds condescending, like, oh, look at cute little Ireland following the rules. As with the Gavin scandal, 4,000 euro 10 years ago wouldn't really move too many votes. I don't think Americans would blink. If it came out that Joe Rogan was advising J.D. Vance while he's publicly trashing Kamala Harris, I mean, there'd be like 6 liberals posting on Blue Sky about the ethics and the unfairness, but people would just kind of shrug. And I'm curious, in the context of the broader world, these scandals, do you think they show that Ireland is an exception in terms of holding on to its ethics, or is the lesson here that America is more the exception by losing its own ethics?
Ethics is a relatively new thing to Irish politics. For a long time, we were an incredibly corrupt and immoral country up to the crash through the 70s, 80s, 90s, right up to 2006, 2008. A lot of big beasts in Irish politics were getting bribes and kickbacks. And it was only after things went bang during the crash that we had to look at how we finance our politicians and our declarations. And we changed the laws about how we finance political parties and politicians. Ireland is now regularly cited as being one of the least corrupt countries in the world. But to look at social media, you think Ireland's a third world tin pot country run by dictators and builders and the like.
Yeah, you get the same sense on social media about America, depending on what site you're on. Our ethics are, I think they have weakened. I really do. And that's kind of a partisan take, and there'll be something pointing.
You don't say.
I mean, it's changed. I do think mixing business and politics was supposed to be kind of a no-no here. And to the extent that there was a Hunter Biden scandal, it was in theory propelled by the idea that family members are not supposed to be profiting off the presidency. And here we are in October. The Financial Times asked Eric Trump, Donald Trump's son, asked him straight away. He said, has the Trump family made $1 billion in cryptocurrency? And Trump's response on the record was, quote, probably more. I'm sure at the same time people were doing things in Ireland, they were doing things in America. We do see them a hell of a lot more brazen about it than we used to be.
Yeah, I mean, Trump is openly using the office of the presidency for his own financial gain. But apart from the Trump-savage ways, his administration, if you could call it that, might start keeping a closer eye on Ireland because of our president's left-wing views and some would say pro-Russian sympathies. If Ireland decides to become even more left-wing, USA might have to invade Ireland to bring us democracy. If we strike oil anywhere, you will try and make us a 51st state, but we probably already are in financial terms, I think.
Look, I'm insulted at the suggestion that the United States of America would even consider meddling in the foreign policy of another sovereign nation. I mean, that is preposterous. So we don't do that quite as often as you might think. But all right, look, this might be an exception. And yes, there's been some noise. Lindsey Graham, the senator and Trump supporter, tweeted last month about Ireland's proposal that Israel be banned from European football tournaments. He came out against that. Robert O'Brien, who was national security advisor during Trump's first term, wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal that was a little bit threatening, right? I mean, predicted, quote, heightened tensions between the U.S. and Ireland, and argued that Connolly, quote, embodies antagonism toward American interest. Criticized Ireland for neutrality, saying, quote, Ireland can no longer have the luxury of a free ride at America's expense. And that was kind of a shot. It is an interesting article because we talked earlier about the actual role of the presidency in the Irish political structure. It's actually not clear from that article whether O'Brien himself understands that role. It's written like Connolly has a lot of power. It does seem like it might have been written in a way to inflame American readers a little bit by making them think, to your point earlier, that Connolly's statements are a larger reflection of Irish foreign policy than they actually are.
That got a lot of traction in Ireland, and a lot of people didn't pick up on the fact that it wasn't just an op-ed. It was actually part of a report from an institution called the Policy Exchange. They're centre-right think tank in London, but links to the British Security Services, so which will enamour them to everybody in Ireland straight away. The British Security Services writing reports on Ireland. I think it was called Ireland's Diplomatic Challenges and Lessons for the UK, and it was in terms of our security and Ireland being the weak link in Europe's defence. And look, he's not wrong on the point that we've been feckless and freeloading in regards to our defence. But O'Brien really understands what being the Irish president involves. Just because Connolly campaigned like Trump and largely ignored the media doesn't mean she has the same powers. Okay, you see how much of a freeloading nation we are off the American security and NATO security. So 75% of all cables, right? That's data cables, fibre optics, that kind of stuff.
Right.
In the Northern Hemisphere, pass through near or pretty much in through Irish territorial waters. And we've no way of defending. Okay, so I mean, we've like 4 Navy ships for territorial waters 7 times our size or something to that effect. If these are cut, then there will be severe consequences because they're linked between, financial institutions across the Atlantic. So if these cables are cut, people don't understand that. And I've been talking about this for a long time, right? So the Russians have been spotted over these cables, okay? If they do the same in the United States, the Coast Guard, the Navy are out straight away and are telling them they're shooting them away. Ireland doesn't have that power. We have to call in the English or we have to call in the French. So, for example, for Zelensky's visit, we had the RAF, the Royal Air Force, British warplanes patrolling the skies around Ireland to make sure there was no kind of Russian interference. And we had French warships off our coast monitoring the seas and monitoring seaway laneway traffic, make sure there was no Russian interference there. So for Zelensky's state visit, such a big deal, we had the French and British guaranteeing our security, right? That's how big a deal it was. The French and the British are basically essentially guaranteeing our security. But what happens if you cut these cables?
Well, I mean, the way the internet and the way digital infrastructure works, it's going to be a disaster.
Yeah, I mean, every single app on your phone will stop working. Bang, gone. No more podcasts, no more Tinder, Grindr. Do you use Grindr, Vint? No? TikTok, X, all your streaming services, they're gone. they're finished. You would probably have to read a book or something. You won't even be able to read my Irish politics newsletter.
Imagine
The
the
thing is,
horror.
yeah, I mean, and a lot of these companies that rely heavily on data, like a lot of major American multinationals headquartered out of Dublin, Ireland's booming tax receipts are entirely dependent on American multinationals for tax revenues, and essentially our fibre optics not failing.
Right.
I mean, you cut them, then the high-tech giants based out of Dublin, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and the rest of the gang are left twiddling their thumbs. Cloud services down, data services down, gone, software updates, nothing happening. There's nothing going on there. The wider context for that is it just won't affect Ireland and America. It's going to affect mainland Europe. It'll affect the UK. Those data cables gone. Most businesses these days, multinationals, Irish business, and across the globe, they rely on just-in-time inventory systems and global supply chains.
We already saw that in 2021, 2022, after the pandemic, when there were shortages of certain materials. And
wasn't there a boat stuck in a canal somewhere? There was a boat stuck in.
There's a boat stuck in a canal. The port in Los Angeles backed up, and that just created to your point, that's a global cascade. That's the way these companies work worldwide now. And if a part doesn't make it from Vietnam to Los Angeles on time, that affects somebody manufacturing things in New York and potentially Toronto and probably even Dublin. That's the way the world works now.
The Financial Times had another deep dive during the week into Ireland's defence capabilities. And one quote stood out for me. Can I read that out for you?
Sure.
This is from the Financial Times during the week. If you just put in Ireland into their search bar, it'll come up, the article will come up. One former UK military official said, "This infrastructure is Ireland's cash cow and Ireland is taking the piss." And I can't disagree with that. I can't disagree that we're so reliant on our data infrastructure, our network infrastructure, and we are absolutely taking the piss. We're taking the Yankee dollar, and we're blowing it on fripperies and not taking our defence seriously in an increasingly dangerous geopolitical environment. We're just kind of giving the two fingers to everybody across Europe.
About that. So that's interesting. So there is a case that the argument that O'Brien is making has some validity to it. Perhaps because of that, there does seem like there are a few people in Ireland who are legitimately worried about that noise leading to more concrete difficulties for Ireland. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, Dan O'Brien, he's the chief economist of the Institute of International and European Affairs. He's beaten this drum on his own for quite some time now, but slowly he's getting others to sit up and take notice. Larry Donnelly, a man previously of Boston, now in situ in Galway, has also urged Ireland to be more cautious when, dealing with the Trump administration and how we're perceived over there. So, I mean, so from your perspective, Vince, do you think there's a risk that Ireland's special relationship with the USA will be damaged?
The short answer, I think, is no. But before elaborating, I'd ask what exactly are the repercussions that Ireland is at risk of facing?
The primary repercussions for Ireland would be punitive tariffs and sanctions against the multinationals that are based here in Ireland, forcing them to relocate to other countries or back to America. People in Ireland, people in power like to talk about multinationals and, how hard it would be to relocate all these manufacturing companies and pharma companies and, the likes of Intel and Pfizer and all these companies. But I can tell you now, these machines are only bolted to the floor and they're easily dismantled and shipped to other countries quite easily. And human capital will always follow the money. And Ireland's nowhere near as secure as it thinks it is when it comes to foreign direct investment.
We talked in the first episode about how popular Ireland is in the United States, and I think that creates a problem for the Trump administration if they want to take, let's say, a more aggressive posture. And I think we can get a sense of this by looking at trade. When Micheál Martin visited the White House in March, Trump talked about the trade deficit while he was there, of course, as he does so often. He talked about U.S. pharma companies, the ones you mentioned, moving to Ireland. That's in part because of the lower corporate tax rate. There are obviously other reasons as well. But while Martin is sitting there, Trump also says Ireland, quote, was very smart to take those companies. And he said, I'm not knocking them for doing that. At the same time, during that meeting, he's complaining pretty endlessly about the EU, which Ireland is a member of. But the policy he's talking about is not EU policy, right? I mean, it's based very specifically on moves that Ireland made, again, in part around the corporate tax rate. He doesn't really have any criticisms of Ireland. Now, I think you can say, maybe that's because Martin is sitting next to him, right? And he's sometimes a little less brave when people are in the room, let's say.
I think he doesn't care. He cares very little who's in the room. I mean, he was very complimentary, of course, to Micheál Martin and how he played America and how Ireland was playing the United States for so many decades in terms of foreign direct investment and relocation and multinationals. But Trump is very capable of criticizing who he wants when he wants. I mean, so more recently, wasn't he criticizing women and journalists in front of other women and journalists? And he referred to a journalist.
That's kind of the point, though, right? He's criticizing a woman in public in a way that he seems less comfortable criticizing a man.
He called a female journalist Piggy, didn't he? I mean,
I didn't call her Piggy. He said, quote, quiet Piggy. Yeah.
Quiet Piggy, was it? All right, yeah. Quiet Piggy. Sorry, I wrote about that. He did. He said Quiet Piggy, yes. And I think the White House press secretary got up and said, "Oh, he's just being frank and authentic. He's just being himself." And look, that's complete.
Really?
I think so. Like the journalist asked about the Epstein files and he deflected by insulting her. Okay, so then the insult became the story, not the Epstein files. The insult becomes the story. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, the term he uses to degrade people then gets ranked alongside the degradations of other journalists he's insulted.
Yeah, that's fair, but I think that actually probably goes to confirm my point a little bit, because he's not criticizing Martin when he's sitting there. And the one term that he does not use, which is his favorite term, it's a term that he's used since at least the late 1980s. And as far as I can tell, it's a term he's never used about Ireland, is, quote, ripped off. Right? That's his favorite thing. He uses it now. China is ripping off. The EU is ripping us off. He has said that the EU was literally founded to rip off the United States. Those penguins on the uninhabited island we tariff, they're ripping us off. Everyone in the world is ripping us off. But he won't say that the Irish are ripping us off, even though in theory, Ireland is kind of one of the biggest examples of how he views global trade. Right. I mean, Ireland has thousands of employees from U.S. multinationals, which in theory are thousands of jobs that could be here. We've had U.S. companies move their entire headquarters, re-domicile to Ireland. You could think as a political statement from him, that would be an absolutely just really simple thing, right? They stole our companies. But he really, other than kind of in these environments, he said really very little about that. And to the point about the meeting with Martin in March, even when he does say something about it, it's couched in a way where the Irish still get some compliment.
Yeah, look, well, we're not ripping America off. We're not ripping the United States off. I think we're just the 51st state, and in a lot of ways, an offshore American multinational state, like something like the U.S. Virgin Islands or something like that, or the U.S. Big Pharma state, you can call us. Don't all the states have nicknames, and we could be called a pharma state?
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, as an American yourself, do you think Trump is capable or wants to do anything about Ireland having all these American multinational jobs? Or does he want to do anything about a sizable chunk of our population supporting Palestinians against Israel? I mean, are these things that are going to keep him awake at night?
I don't know that they're going to keep him awake. I do think that they are probably both things he would like to do about. But the reason I'm bringing up trade in the context of the O'Brien op-ed and Connolly's comments about Israel and Palestine have raised some eyebrows in D.C. as well. I just don't think that there's really anything that he can do. First off, it's probably about 10%, maybe more of his base is Irish American. And we'll talk more about that and why that is in the next episode. But that's a good chunk of his base and of the kind of the strongest part of his base. And some of those people, no doubt, are more loyal to Trump than Ireland. But it's doing something concrete to Ireland, I think, is going to be a tough sell to that group. The bigger issue that kind of to the point you raised, his base right now is not particularly pro-Israel. In this term, his base is really fractured twice, and once obviously is over the Epstein files. But the bigger one was when we bombed Iran in June. And there was a large number of his supporters in Congress and in the media who came out pretty strongly against that and said, this is not what we voted for. This is not America first. We're not following Israel into a war. I think for his base, whether they're Irish American or not, saying, oh, look, we're going to sanction Ireland for being insufficiently loyal to Israel, or even for, quote, taking our jobs, I don't think it's going to be a win overall. It's probably a loss, but at best, it's not something that's really going to get his base going on either issue. And I think the broader issue kind of goes back to how I started this, which is Ireland is really popular in America. And so if you tell the average American voter, Trump just put sanctions on Ireland, I mean, they're going to be stunned. They're going to be confused. What? I mean, what are you talking about? He's sanctioning the place with the leprechauns and the rainbows and the pubs. That's no good. So I do think it's strange to say, kind of given the imbalance between the two countries in terms of population and things like that. I think it's strange to say that Ireland has quite a bit of power here. But from a practical political standpoint, anything that is really tangible and public, where you're talking sanctions, I think it's just really hard for Trump or in fact, any American president to ever do. It's going to look like Trump is bullying a small country that Americans like. And if you want to get kind of really dark about it, we don't really do that to countries run by white people, right?
All right, that's pretty dark. If we were darker skin, more tanned, do you think that might happen?
Being lovable and pale is what's saving Ireland from the wrath of Trump right now.
So the reason we're not being punished more heavily, like say Switzerland or Cambodia, is because everyone likes Thailand and we don't have great hands. I mean, that's the kind of deep geopolitical analysis I think people would sign up for.
Yeah, let's see Matt Cooper pull that off.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. We're going to be talking about the American president, Donald Trump, next week. I'll be very irreverent and I'll be asking Vince straight up, is Donald Trump a paedophile? While Vince stares nervously over his shoulder at the door in case the FBI are coming to break it down. So we'll see how that goes. We'll see how your First Amendment rights are then, pal. I'm Tull from the Irish Politics Newsletter.
And I'm Vince Martin. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week. Bye-bye.